It didn't just smell like death, it was death. Hidden beneath the sun-scorched plains of rural Texas, a nightmare was stitched together, not in silence, but in screams. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre wasn't merely a movie, it was a ritual of discomfort, a low-budget descent into madness that blurred the line between fiction and rotting flesh. Shot in relentless heat with real animal remains, live injuries, and a crew pushed past sanity, this was cinema that bled literally and emotionally. Leatherface didn't wear a mask. He wore identity disorder, societal decay, and something disturbingly human. Behind that whirring chainsaw was a question no one wanted to answer. What happens when civilization snaps? Was it horror? Was it satire? Or was it just a camera capturing something that should have stayed buried? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, the film that didn't just redefine terror, it became it. Fact 1. The dinner scene wasn't acting. It was real psychological collapse. The dinner scene is one of the most harrowing sequences in horror history, but what audiences didn't know is that by the time it was filmed, the actors were already broken. The sequence took over 26 straight hours to shoot in a sweltering house filled with the stench of real rotting meat and animal bones. The cast wasn't just sweating, they were hallucinating, crying, and screaming for real. Marilyn Burns, who played Sally, later admitted she genuinely believed she was going to die on set. Gunnar Hansen, playing Leatherface, said he felt like he was losing his grip on reality. The gun that Grandpa tries to use, it was real, and it misfired multiple times. The screams, the shaking, the panic, none of it was scripted. It was breakdown, not performance. So when you rewatch that moment, ask yourself, are you watching horror or a nervous system snapping in real time? Fact 2. Leatherface had multiple personalities reflected in his masks. Most villains wear a mask to hide who they are. Leatherface wears masks to become someone else entirely. According to actor Gunnar Hansen, the character had 3 distinct masks, each one representing a different mood or identity. There was the killing mask for brutal scenes, the old lady mask for cooking and chores, and the pretty woman mask with makeup, used for the dinner scene. Director Tobe Hooper never explains this on screen. It was a detail reserved for those who looked closer. Hansen said Leatherface had no identity of his own. He was a blank slate, forming personalities through masks like a child raised without language. So was Leatherface just a butcher? Or was he a shattered mind trying to piece together a human identity from the faces of others? Fact 3. The chainsaw was real and it almost killed the actor. The whirring, screaming chainsaw in the movie wasn't a prop. It was a real, gas-powered Poulon, 306 amperes, teeth sharp, engine loud, and absolutely deadly. Gunnar Hansen had to operate it while charging at actors, smashing through doors, and spinning in blind rage without any stunt training. During one scene in the forest, he tripped and fell with the chainsaw still running inches from his neck. The blade missed his head by less than an inch. No stand-ins, no visual effects, just raw risk. Hooper later admitted it was the dumbest, riskiest thing we ever did. But that begs the question, was the horror genius? Or just recklessly close to a real death caught on film? Fact 4. The film was marketed as a true story and everyone believed it. When the Texas Chain Saw Massacre hit theaters, audiences came in believing it was based on real events. That wasn't an accident. The opening crawl claims it's a true story, and the gritty handheld cinematography made it feel like a crime documentary. The truth? It was a lie, but a powerful one. Director Tobe Hooper admitted he intentionally blurred fiction and fact, loosely basing the story on the crimes of Ed Gein, a Wisconsin killer known for skinning corpses. But Gein never used a chainsaw, never lived in Texas, and never ran a cannibal family. Still, Hooper knew the power of suggestion. He fed the myth, and the media played along. To this day, many still believe Leatherface was real proof that horror doesn't need ghosts. It just needs convincing lies dressed up in sweat and blood. So, was it ethical storytelling, or the first case of viral fake news in horror cinema? Fact 5. The house smelled like death because it was full of it. What's that smell? According to the cast, it was unbearable rot. The farmhouse where the movie was filmed wasn't a set. It was a real house, filled with decaying animal bones, dead possums, and real meat left out in 110 degrees Fahrenheit heat. Hooper didn't want artificial props, he wanted authentic decay. Gunnar Hansen said the stench was so bad he vomited between takes. Flies infested the walls. One actor fainted. Another swore he saw maggots move inside a prop. It wasn't a haunted house, it was a biohazard zone. The irony? The cast feared Leatherface on screen. but it was the environment that almost drove them insane. Sometimes the scariest part of horror filmmaking isn't the villain, it's the smell of artistic ambition gone too far. Fact 6. Marilyn Burns really got hurt and they kept rolling. Playing Sally Hardesty was not just exhausting, it was dangerous. Marilyn Burns endured actual injuries throughout the film, from thorn scratches and rope burns to a real cut on her finger during the infamous dinner scene. When Grandpa struggles to hold the hammer and feed on her blood, the fake blood device failed. So director Tobe Hooper made a choice. They used a real razor blade and actually sliced her finger to get the shot. Burns later said she was so numb with exhaustion, she didn't even feel it. That blood on screen? It's hers. No corn syrup, no prosthetics, just human fatigue and one director's relentless obsession with realism. Should that moment be celebrated as commitment to art or a line that should never have been crossed? Fact 7. The actor playing the hitchhiker was told to make people uncomfortable and he took it too far. Ed Neal, who portrayed the unhinged hitchhiker, wasn't just acting weird. He was instructed to push boundaries, to become someone audiences would feel physically repulsed by. So he did. He improvised most of his dialogue, smeared fake blood on real props, and would sometimes lick things between takes, including the car window. But what disturbed the crew more wasn't the performance. It was that he didn't break character, even during lunch breaks. Marilyn Burns once recalled how Neal sat alone in a corner, mumbling and rocking, refusing to acknowledge his own name. Cast members started avoiding him. Hooper? He let it happen. He believed discomfort made the scenes work. But when the camera wasn't rolling and Neal was still muttering about head cheese in a twitchy southern drawl, the question became, was it method acting or something leaking from inside? Fact 8. The film was almost rated X for violence that was mostly implied. Ironically, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre is not that gory. There's barely any blood on screen, no dismemberment. Most of the violence is suggested implied through camera angles, sound, and frantic editing. But the atmosphere was so raw, so overwhelming, that censors were convinced it was X-rated. Hooper initially aimed for a PG rating. Yes, really, hoping the lack of explicit gore would help. But the intensity was too much. The British Board of Film Classification banned it outright, and many US theaters refused to screen it. The film achieved what many gorefests never could. It horrified without showing much at all. That raises a chilling thought. Maybe what scares us isn't what we see, but what our minds invent to fill in the dark spaces. Fact 9. Leatherface's chainsaw dance was improvised out of pure frustration. The final scene, where Leatherface twirls his chainsaw in the sunrise like a deranged ballet dancer, is iconic. But that wasn't choreographed. It was Gunnar Hansen's improvisation, born out of sheer rage and exhaustion. Hooper had told him to do something big, so Hansen just let go. He was covered in sweat, breathing heavily, and furious after days of shooting in brutal heat. As the chainsaw roared and the sun rose, Hansen spun in a storm of violence and grace. No safety rig, no stand-ins, just one man unleashing everything the film had done to him. It became the perfect final image. Leatherface not as a killer, but as a child, throwing a tantrum into the void. So was it performance, or was it Gunnar Hansen finally breaking? Fact 10. The film was so intense, some viewers fainted in theaters. When the movie premiered in 1974, it wasn't just screams that echoed through the audience, it was bodies hitting the floor. Reports flooded in from across the US, viewers vomiting, fainting, and in some cases, walking out in tears. One theater in San Francisco had to call paramedics after 3 people collapsed during the dinner scene. But what triggered these reactions wasn't gore. It was the relentless dread, the claustrophobic sound design, the raw aggression of the editing. Tobe Hooper crafted an experience that didn't let up. There was no comic relief, no space to breathe, just 46 minutes of sustained psychological assault. Critics were divided. Some called it a masterpiece. Others called it an act of violence against cinema itself. But the real question is, when art causes people to pass out, has it gone too far, or has it finally hit a nerve that movies were too afraid to touch? Fact 11. The cast was paid so little, they couldn't afford to watch the movie. Despite the film's massive cultural impact, the actors behind it made next to nothing. Marilyn Burns was paid around $400 for weeks of grueling work. Gunnar Hansen earned $800 total, and most of the supporting cast signed away their rights in confusing contracts they didn't fully understand. When the movie blew up, earning millions worldwide, none of them saw a proper cut. Burns once said she had to sneak into a theater because she couldn't afford a ticket. Legal disputes followed, but by then the damage was done. The legacy belonged to the studio, not the people who bled for it. So the horror wasn't just on screen, it was in the exploitation behind the scenes. And perhaps that's the most American thing about this Texas Tale of Slaughter. Fact 12. The original title was so long, it almost doomed the film. Before it became the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, the working title was Head Cheese. Yes, head cheese, a reference to the jellied meat mentioned by the hitchhiker in the van scene. Other early titles included Leatherface and Stalking Leatherface, neither of which sparked much confidence. Distributors balked. Investors rolled their eyes. Nobody wanted to finance a film with a name that sounded like a failed deli product. It wasn't until Hooper and co-writer Kim Henkel settled on the Texas Chain Saw Massacre that the tone clicked brutal, bold, unforgettable. Ironically, it was that title, crude and literal, that sold the movie. Not clever marketing, just a raw, unflinching name that told audiences exactly what they were in for. So the question becomes, would head cheese have ever carved its way into cinematic history? Fact 13. The chainsaw sound wasn't just a chainsaw. You might think the terrifying, revving sound of Leatherface's weapon came straight from a real saw, but that's only partially true. In post-production, sound designer Wayne Bell layered the real engine noise with animal screams, reversed audio, and slowed-down pig squeals to make it more guttural and primal. The result? A chainsaw that didn't just sound mechanical, it sounded alive. It howled like it wanted blood. In some scenes, Hooper even synced the revs with the characters' screams, creating a sonic mirroring effect that made panic feel inevitable. So that chainsaw you hear isn't just a tool, it's a monster in its own right, not Leatherface's weapon, but his voice. And maybe that's why it still echoes in our heads decades later, because it was never just metal. Fact 14. The actor who played Grandpa was only 18 under all that makeup. He looked ancient, decayed, barely able to move. But the man playing Grandpa was John Dugan, just 18 years old during filming. Hooper didn't want to cast an actual elderly actor because the scenes were too intense, so they transformed Dugan using latex prosthetics, real animal grease, and hours of makeup work in unventilated heat. The process was so unbearable that Dugan refused to go through it more than once. That's why all of Grandpa's scenes were filmed in a single day over 30 consecutive hours. No sleep, no breaks. Just a teenager slowly melting inside a rubber face. And yet, audiences believed every frame. It was a performance built not on acting but on endurance and dehydration. Sometimes, the most convincing horror is the most physically miserable. Fact 15. The chainsaw scene was so loud it caused hearing damage on set. You can't fake chainsaw noise, and during filming, you also couldn't control it. The deafening sound of the Poulan 306 amperes engine rattled the walls, pierced the crew's ears, and made communication nearly impossible. There were no sound barriers, no digital filters, just raw decibels in a confined space. Sound techs later admitted they had to guess at microphone placements. Some crew members wore cotton in their ears. Gunnar Hansen, wearing the heavy Leatherface mask, was so close to the noise source that he developed temporary hearing loss after filming certain scenes. But the kicker? That overwhelming sound wasn't toned down in editing, it was amplified. Hooper wanted audiences to feel what the crew felt, disoriented, trapped, under sonic assault. And maybe that's why the chainsaw isn't just a sound effect, it's a form of psychological warfare. Fact 16. The director used a real slaughterhouse as inspiration and visited it often. Tobe Hooper didn't just imagine horror, he researched it in blood. During pre-production, he made repeated visits to a local slaughterhouse in Texas. He watched animals being bludgeoned, skinned, and gutted, documenting everything not out of fascination, but out of a desire for emotional accuracy. What disturbed him the most wasn't the brutality. It was the indifference. Workers joked as they worked. The screams were just background noise. That dead-eyed numbness, that's what Hooper injected into Leatherface and his family. Their horror isn't rage, it's routine. The most chilling detail? Hooper said the hammer kill scene was inspired by how cattle were traditionally stunned in the slaughterhouse. The difference is, in the film, the killing keeps failing. So maybe the real horror wasn't invented at all. It was just relocated, from industrial floors to cinema screens. Fact 17. The blood was sometimes real, because fake blood couldn't handle the heat. In normal productions, fake blood is a mix of syrup and dye. But in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, the Texas heat melted everything. The fake blood kept drying too fast, clumping, and changing color under the lights. So, for close-up shots, particularly around wounds and hands, they often used real blood from the actors themselves. Gunnar Hansen accidentally cut himself multiple times. Marilyn Burns' hands were wrapped in bandages not as props, but because they were bleeding from branches and rope friction. The final chase scene, her blood-streaked arms weren't part of makeup, they were documentation. It wasn't a horror movie pretending to be dangerous. It was a dangerous experience, barely disguised as a movie. Fact 18. The film's most disturbing sound was a pig squeal, slowed to sound like a man. While most people remember the chainsaw, the real psychological unease comes from the background, noises, shrieks, echoes, whines that don't quite sound human. That's because they're not. Hooper and sound designer Wayne Bell recorded pigs being slaughtered, then pitched down the audio and layered it with reversed breathing sound. The result is a terrifying hybrid, a sound that feels like a man being tortured, but one you can't quite place. It plays subtly in key scenes, especially in the house, creating a subconscious dread that audiences couldn't name but couldn't shake. So when people left the theater saying, "I don't know what scared me most," the answer might have been inaudible, a sound designed to haunt your lizard brain, not your ears. Fact 19. The crew wore the same clothes for weeks and they couldn't wash them. You can fake grime on costumes or you can marinate in it. On this shoot, it was the latter. Because of budget limitations and continuity concerns, the actors, especially Gunnar Hansen, had only one costume each. No duplicates, no backups. That meant the same sweat-soaked, blood-stained clothes had to be worn every day for weeks. And because the team needed the stains to match between takes, the wardrobe department refused to let them be washed. Hansen's Leatherface costume reportedly reeked so badly, the crew avoided standing near him. Marilyn Burns' outfit became so stiff with fake blood and real sweat, it could stand upright on its own. The smell, the discomfort, the heat, all of it seeped into the film. What you see isn't acting. It's physical misery recorded in 24 frames per second. And the lesson? Sometimes budget limitations don't hurt a horror film, they create the horror. Fact 20. The final chase scene was filmed with 0 permits and real traffic. That iconic moment where Sally escapes Leatherface, screaming and flailing into the open road, it was shot without permits, without safety rigs, and with real passing vehicles. The crew had no legal clearance to block traffic or use stunt drivers. The truck that stops to help her? A real driver, not a trained actor. He was instructed to just react naturally. The pickup that finally rescues her? It was borrowed from a local, and its driver had no idea how to brake properly on cue. Every near miss in that scene is exactly that, a real near miss. Burns was almost hit. Hansen had to stop inches from impact. It wasn't choreography, it was controlled chaos. And maybe that's the ultimate truth of this film. It was never just a performance. It was a survival story, for everyone both in front of the camera and behind it. Bonus fact. The skeleton at the end was real and no one talked about it. In the final haunting shot of Leatherface's lair, a brittle, sun-bleached skeleton sits in a rocking chair, mouth open, hand curled, seemingly watching. Most assumed it was a prop, but it wasn't. That skeleton was real human bone, imported from India and purchased legally through a medical supply catalog. Back in the 70s, it was cheaper and more common for films to use authentic human remains than to build fake ones. According to some crew members, no one questioned it. It arrived wrapped in canvas, labeled simply, anatomical model, no name, no origin, just bone. The skeleton was positioned, lit, and filmed like any other object. But there's something eerie about that silent figure, the one cast member that never blinked, never spoke, and never got credited. Who was it? We'll never know. All that's left is the unsettling possibility that someone, a real person, became part of the most infamous horror film in history, without consent, without recognition, without a name. So, when the credits roll and the house goes quiet, one presence lingers. Not Leatherface, not Sally, but a mystery that's still rocking in the dark. If you made it through all 20, maybe you've survived something the cast barely did. But the question remains, which detail unsettled you the most? The bones, the blood, or the silence that followed? Tell us in the comments. Which fact changed the way you see this film and what movie should we dissect next? Your suggestion might be the next story we expose.